Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to be with you all. We're going to get started. If you can find your seats, this is your 1-minute warning. Okay, welcome everybody. Good to see you all. I'm Father Josh Stevens, the rector here at St. John. Welcome to our online folks as well. We are going to continue our unit on Bowen Family Systems Theory. It's called Why My Kids Won't Talk to Me, an introduction to family systems. And so I want to do a little bit of catch up to review what we talked about last week. So I'm just going to go back here a bit. Do this very briefly, but I first of all, if I haven't said it, really glad to have you here. Thank you for making time for this, chance to visit together and to step into God's grace as a community. I really feel like this time complements the Sunday worship time so beautifully because you need both, but this is like the time where you get to connect with each other, and kind of realize we're all sharing this journey of faith together in our own ways. So we are introducing you to this gentleman, Dr. Murray Bowen, who was a psychiatrist in the last century and ended up doing a lot of therapy. He ended up developing this theory through, especially with his time that he spent with the National Health Service, where he had a 5-year lab where families would live together. In this lab, he would observe families that had somebody with severe schizophrenia, and he would, in like a clinical but like residential setting, he could observe their dynamics. And what he found was that the dynamics were really predictable, and that they fell into these certain patterns that are patterns that you're going to be really familiar with. We're going to talk about those especially today. He found that the anxiety that a family is a system which people are kind of bound together through anxiety, or sometimes it's through, I think, maybe better said, through emotional maturity and resilience and things. But the anxiety is usually a term that's used. It's a way of folks coping with life, and that they feed off of each other, basically. And so there's 8 concepts to that, which are here on the screen. And we're going to talk about number 1 a little more today, and get into some of the family dynamics that you're going to find familiar. So here's a couple of quotes from Murray Bowen. "I have developed a family systems theory of emotional functioning. Only a small percentage of people are really able to hear it. And this is the goal. We're going to talk about this more next week. The goal is to take a microscopic step toward a better level of differentiation in spite of the togetherness forces that oppose." Because part of the work of this is to be able to determine who you are, and just as a person, be clear about what your values are, and so that those are not compromised when you're in a relationship with people who often make you into someone that you don't really want to be, right? We call those people our siblings or our parents. And so, it's the work of self-differentiation, which we're going to talk about next week more, is figuring out, okay, how do I stand on my own 2 feet and be an individual, while still being in touch with people who have often given me certain roles to play that I've often played. So this is like emotional maturity is another way of phrasing it. And the example, which I think is neat to talk about this weekend, is if you think about somebody like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., well, here's somebody whose maturity and self-differentiation allowed him to stand literally in front of people who were doing violence and not compromise his convictions and values. So that's like a really incredible example of self-differentiation. So There in Bowen family systems theory, the nuclear family rather than individual is the emotional unit. So again, this is when you think about someone's like issues in your family or your own issues, what it's saying is that those are maybe not so much about the individual, but they're about the dynamics of the whole unit together. So that's really different, right? Because when you go to a therapist today, they're going to help you deal with your own personal problems, and this is looking at it as a collective unit. Relationships resolve one source of anxiety, that is of being alone, but they also create another source of anxiety, that of loss of self. So there's this constant tension that we have between being an individual and then being together with family. And that's what church is about. That's what families are about. That tension defines our struggle for self-differentiation. So we're going to talk about this first concept. You'll see it at the top of the slide, the nuclear family emotional system. The theory says that anxiety travels from one member of the family to the other in predictable ways, and the fancy word for that is homeostasis. So I feel like I need to explain this a little bit. What this means is that when my 8-year-old daughter wakes up in the morning, I'm usually in the kitchen. My wife is trying to get some sleep. But immediately, my daughter wants to see my wife. Immediately, right? So she really wants to go and to snuggle my wife, and to see her. And so that's the homeostasis. Now, if I want to mess with that homeostasis, if I want to say to her, no, you need to stay out here with me because Rosanna's sleeping, what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to hear about how that's not okay. There's going to be whining. There's going to be some crying. Now, if she's in a more mature moment, she might actually say, okay, well, what time is mommy going to get up? If she didn't sleep well, if she's really hungry, it's before breakfast. And if I'm really hungry too, it could turn into a whole thing. But the homeostasis is that there's a bond between her and my wife that if I get in the middle of, then it messes up the way it's meant to be, it feels like. So it doesn't mean you can't change it. It just means that homeostasis is going to resist the change, which is a warning to you as you think about your families, is if you think about some of these things and the dynamics that have shaped you, and you observe them and you're able to kind of map them out and you think, this has been heavy and hard for a long time. I'm tired of banging my head against the wall. You might be able to actually mature and to self-differentiate in a way where you can change some of those dynamics through your own functioning, not through trying to change other people. But the system is going to buck that every step of the way. The system is going to push back against that change. So you have to know that that's coming and be prepared for that. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to me? And think carefully about what needs to be changed and what doesn't. These patterns are passed down intergenerationally from parents to their children. Another way to think about this is when you watch that Animal Planet video of the herd, there are certain animals in the herd who have functions. And you could even replace those animals and other animals would step up and do the same function. And the easiest example of that is when there's a herd of, what should we imagine? Wildebeest, gazelle, cows, it doesn't matter. This is actually a biological thing. Murray Bowen talks about this even at the cellular level. If you have a herd of gazelle and a predator is approaching, one of the gazelle is going to have his anxiety spike before the others, right? And that's a role in that herd. There's some that are going to be less worried about it. There's some going to be more worried about it. So these dynamics actually play out in the animal kingdom. They play out in human families as well, that some members of the family, their anxiety gets higher over certain things, because we learn from our parents and through our family of origin. So we're going to talk about some of these patterns. on a little one of the conflict so high the relationship between two people just isn't stable enough in most cases. And one of your kids is against them and stressed out and talking about it, the third person starts to say, this is what we try these triangles in a lot of different forms. So here's some examples of these. Talking against third party. So having an affair is an example of triangling. Family secrets. That's one we're going to talk a little bit more about. Focusing on one of the kids more than anyone else is another example of that. And so just want to talk about that last one a little bit. This is a common pattern in families. We call this the focused child. And this can happen in a lot of different ways. So let's diagram it a little bit. Let's just say, again, this is kind of a oversimplification a little bit. It can be a little more complicated intergenerationally. But if this is a husband and this is a wife, it could be same gender relationship too, it doesn't matter. And there's conflict. I gotta do something first. Okay, here we go. I think it'll work now. So if there's conflict between the two parents in the family, one of the really common ways that conflict is dealt with, it could be emotional disagreement, it could be feeling distant from each other, but if there's something about their relationship that is where the anxiety's higher, then a really common way that families deal with that is to focus on the issues of a kid, to focus on the child. It's a lot easier to focus on the kid than it is to deal with things, between the marriage. It could also be that we focus on a kid as like an intergenerational pattern. It could be that in your family, you think about it. It was all in your family. You might also have one of the kids that everyone tends to talk about and worry about. And that can repeat again and again. Now, if you have an only child, then this inevitably almost plays out. And you have to actually kind of resist the urge to make your entire home, your entire family system all about your kid. Because the main relationship in the home is actually, the marriage or the relationship of the adult that's involved, that's leading the home. So these patterns tend to play out. Not every family has that, but that's just one of the dynamics that tends to play out. One way you could think about this is who has my family spent the most money on? So you follow the money as a sign of the dynamics and the anxiety, right? And so because of the child dynamic. Another way that triangling can play out is, let's just say that if we have two siblings who are fighting. So if two of the kids are driving each other crazy, brother and sister. Hold on one second. And maybe some of you all you have an example of this, who have kids at the home right now. Then they're going to triangle in a parent pretty quickly, when they're going to come to the parent and they're going to be upset and they're going to be whining and and say, so-and-so's driving me crazy. So then what happens is usually it's whichever one gets more frustrated, can't kind of handle it, then they actually will pass on the stress. This well, again, this is just multiple siblings. Might be that you kind of talk with about the other members of your family, and there's kind of a closeness to it. So one way of diagramming that is 2 lines, and then there could be that there's another one where there's kind of a distance from them, and that the family all kind of works that way. If you keep one close and the other one's distant, but that's just the way you deal with the anxiety in the family. That's the way you get through the events, and so forth. So triangling. Triangles are neither good nor bad. They're just what we do. But how we do them is actually really important. So like one of my principles I have in ministry is that if someone comes to me with where they heard that another person has a problem with me, then I want to talk to the person who actually has the problem, right? So I'm not interested in talking so much about what you heard someone else say about me, right? So it doesn't mean that I maybe say it that way. I might say it, okay, well, let them know to come chat with me if there's something they have a question about. In not so helpful ways, if we engage in triangles in that kind of way. All right, so let's talk about another pattern here. This one is called relationship fusion. And so with this one of the things that we often see is that 2 members of the family, when anxiety is high and there's not a lot of emotional maturity, 2 people can become fused together so much that the emotional reality of what I mean. So this here might be in a relationship to each other like this, but for some families, actually become fused together. And so the well-being of one is completely wrapped up in the well-being of another. And so that's where we talk about, we kind of move them together just as a way of diagramming it, where it's hard to separate the two. And so this can be, a parent and child. This can be this can be a spouse relationship, siblings as well. They end up being really fused together in a way where, if one says, oh my gosh, the world's ending, well, then the world's ending for the other one as well. And I think you've all probably met people like that, right? You've probably experienced that in some way, even yourselves. You might have been caught up in that also. So that's what we call relationship fusion. Okay, let me see here. Another one is similar to the fusion, but kind of the opposite when anxiety is high, is when the stress gets so high between 2 family members, then the pattern is for you to distance from each other. And then that distance can also become so intense that you actually cut off emotionally from one another. So an example of this might be if you have a parent, grandparent, sibling, an aunt and uncle that you don't talk to in your family, where talking to them is just not something you do. It might have been a cutoff you inherited from your parents or grandparents. Maybe there's a family reunion or a family party, and there's one member of the family who is actually not invited. So that's not uncommon. Or if someone else hears that they're coming, then they don't come. So distancing and cutoffs can happen as well. They can even happen within the same household. So you can be emotionally distanced or cut off from someone you're living with, in other words, which is not something you think about. Other times, geography can actually kind of be an indicator of distancing because, like this is the example of someone was telling me about this story. I can't remember who it was, but it was when like the kids turned 18 before they even like finished high school, like they were out of there, right? Because they just couldn't handle living there. So they left home, right away. Or maybe it seems a little healthier than that. Maybe it's when you're applying to colleges, you really choose colleges that are far away because you think, I got to get away from these people. And what's interesting about distancing and about fusion as well and cutoffs is that they don't actually resolve the intensity or the anxiety between the people. These ones are actually binders. Instead, they like lock in the dynamics and the stress of it, and they make it permanent. So they don't actually solve it. But what happens to all of us, right, is that we're trying to get a little room to breathe, and so we often distance from each other as a way of trying to just handle some of the heaviness of what we're going through. Okay, so here's another fun one, and we're going to chat about these as well. This family pattern is very predictable and happens in most families. Over-functioning and under-functioning reciprocity, it's called. So what does that mean? Well, I'll give you an example. I heard a story recently from a minister who was reflecting on when his kids were in high school. And what would happen quite regularly is his kids would sleep in and miss the bus. And he would be fuming, the whole like, get out of bed. You all have been there, lived that. Some of you living it now. So he would get so upset about it, but he would just, we got to go right now. Let's go get in the car, get them in the car, and rush and get them to school so that, they didn't miss class. And this kept happening, right? This is stuff that happens over years. This isn't one-off. This happens again and again and again. So he was driving himself crazy by how he kept on repeating this cycle. So he started to think more and more about the functioning and the role that he was in. He remembered that there was a similar dynamic when he was a kid. So in an effort for maturity and for self-differentiation, he had a conversation with his dad that he probably wouldn't have had normally. It wasn't pleasant for him because he wanted to ask his dad, well, what was it like when you were taking me to school when I was sleeping in? Right? How was that for you? What would you like to have done differently? Right? And so he thought about this and he got really clear about what he was going to do. He knew he had to change his functioning and the way he talked to his kids about it. So when he felt like he was ready to make that change, he sat down with two of his kids and he told them that if they missed the bus, then they would go in with him at his usual time and that they would miss their first period. But that was the best he could do, and that they were going to have to figure out a way to get up and to catch the bus if that was important to them. So what do you think happened? You think that the next day and the day after and all the other days, they just woke up early? No. So sure enough, within a week or two, they sleep in, and he has to stick with it, right? Now the kids are anxious. Dad, come on, I've got to go. Say, nope, I'll take you in about 40 minutes. That's when I go into work. So after 3 or 4 times of them missing their first period, now the kids felt the consequences of what they were doing. And then they made a change where they decided that they wanted to get to school on time, so they got up earlier. So over-functioning, under-functioning, reciprocity, I think it often has to do with helping, with not letting people experience the consequences of their action. So there's one person who's swooping in and rescuing another from the consequences of what they're actually doing. This is really common in relationships where one person has a serious mental health issue or an addiction. Very common. Where if you're raised with that especially, or if you marry into it, then we often develop patterns that cover and compensate for the person whose addiction is causing them to not take care of themselves or the family or the job, and so forth. And this has real world consequences. We end up in other relationships or in our work over-functioning or under-functioning in a way that's quite harmful for life. That's quite stressful. We actually tend to find romantic relationships that allow a lot of these patterns to continue. So when you're dating someone, if you are used to being an over-functioner that rescues some other people, then you'd be amazed how you're attracted to someone who needs rescuing. And so you end up finding that comfortable. And this will happen, right? These dynamics, I guarantee you, they played a part in who you might have married. But again, that doesn't mean that they're good or bad. We're just trying to get our head around them and so that we might see them a little bit more clearly. I'll give you an example. So if you have a family, this is to show you what a healthy overfunctioning looks like and what an unhealthy one looks like. So let's say you have a family where a parent gets sick, like really sick, like they develop cancer. And so the family, they meet and they talk about this, and they tell the 14-year-old, we're going to need some help from you because, mom's going to be really sick. And so you're going to have to get the kids up in the morning and get them out to school. And let's say that this goes on for like a year. But the mom gets better, goes through treatment, and then it reverts back to the mom doing her job. And the 14-year-old goes back to being a 14-year-old. Well, that's a healthy family system, right, where we step in for each other. A different dynamic would be where a 14-year-old or somebody becomes sick, and the 14-year-old has to shift roles, and they stay in that role, right, forever. And so now the 14-year-old is functioning as a parent to the younger kids. And that's going to really be something that they're going to have to work on, as they get older. Or not. They might just continue to do that. But if it gets locked in and it becomes permanent, well, now those dynamics, we might think, well, that's not quite as healthy. And there's a lot of those situations when you have somebody with an addiction in your home, where a lot of kids end up functioning like parents. And nobody knows it outside the family a lot of times until one day the kid just mentions to a counselor or a teacher or something, well, we had to get my dad dressed before I could come in, or something. Oh, well, tell me about that. They go, oh, yeah, well, we all have to get my dad up every morning because he stays up late, Well, what does he stay up late doing? Oh, well, drinking. And so then it starts to come out a bit. That is extremely common, that we compensate, we overfunction for one because the stress is too high. So these are some of the examples of family dynamics. We'll go back over them real quick. We have triangling. When anxiety or conflict between two people gets high enough, then a third person gets triangled in. Sometimes they'll say in the theory that even you can triangle in an item. So like when you throw something, now you put the stress on the item and you feel a lot better. Might not be a healthy way to do it, but that's a triangle. A focused child is a really interesting one. Family secrets as well. Fusion, when two people's well-being seems to be fused together. Another example with this is interesting is you see, when a spouse dies, that's a really tough situation in general, right? And so the grieving process sometimes will show, how fused that they might have been. And so I've had people in church who, within the first year of a spouse dying, they've bought and sold multiple houses They've gotten remarried, all within the first year, right? Because of that kind of anxiety and stress from the tightness, the emotional fusion. Distance and cutoff. When you can't handle it, you think, I'm going to make some distance here. And over-functioning and under-functioning reciprocity is another one that is a really common dynamic. A little bit do that. If you we're going to have this is our homework for today. And, what was the someone focuses on, spends about stresses over. And under-functioning, over-functioning is